It's great to have the dream of being a jewelry designer, but you have to know what that entails. It's not just, okay, lay out a few stones and then boom, I'm suddenly a jewelry designer.
You're listening to Thrive by Design, business, marketing, and lifestyle strategies for your jewelry brand to flourish and thrive. Let's get started.
Welcome to the Thrive by Design podcast, episode 173. Hey there, I'm Tracy Matthews, the Chief Visionary Officer over at Flourish and Thrive, and I'm excited to be here today because we are talking all things scale. And I love talking about how to grow your business so much that today's episode is all about problem solving and how to problem solve when you're trying to scale your business. So I have a very special guest on the show today. Her name is Jean Z Poh, and she is the founder of swoonrate.com. She has a really robust history in the jewelry industry. She comes from a manufacturing background, and she also has a background in tech and as an attorney, as you're going to see. And we just had a really interesting conversation because one of the things that we discussed in this interview, and one of the things that I know growing several businesses over the years, is that the problems that you have when you're starting your business are so different than the problems that you have sort of as you begin to grow, and then the problems that you have as you start to scale. They are all different, and you have to approach them in a very, very different way. And so problem solving, we got into the jewelry industry because we probably are great problem solvers when it comes to making a piece of jewelry, but you also have to be a problem solver when it comes to running a business. And so we discussed some really great issues in this, from manufacturing, from how to scale up and scale down, and all the way to really how to approach your business in a way that is mindful and helpful. And we had such a good time that I will definitely be having Jean back on as a guest on the show as well. So I'm going to dive into today's episode without further ado in just a moment. But first, I'd love to take a word from our sponsor. Our sponsor for the show today is findingbox.com. We love Finding Box. They specialize in custom engraved, logoed hang tags, beads, and custom jewelry pouches. They work with small independent jewelry brands all the time. In fact, they love working with small business, and they've worked with over 2,000 already, and hopefully more after this, because we love supporting small businesses that support small business over here at Flourish and Thrive. The cool thing about Finding Box, when you order hang tags or logoed beads or pouches from them, is sometimes they can have really fast lead times, like 24 hours. You place the order, they're shipping 24 hours later. Awesome, right? You also don't have to order a ton of things. You can get a really small order minimum, and they do free design revisions and also provide you with the sample. So it's a really great resource for you to have in your Rolodex for options for hang tags and logoed products. We would love to share with you a really special offer that findingbox.com has going on. They're offering the Flourish and Thrive Academy listeners and the Thrive by Design listeners 10% off their first order. You just have to order by January 31st, 2019. You can head on over to findingbox.com, place your order, and use the discount code F&T podcast. That's F&T podcast. And make sure that you're using all caps and enjoy 10% off your first order. All right, before we dive in, I wanted to formally introduce Jean. She's also confused for a Filipino rap star, so we're going to use her full name, Jean Z Poh. She is the founder and CEO of swoonrate.com, a multi-brand designer jewelry e-tailer. Jean is a fourth-generation jewelry professional, an angel investor, a contributor to the Rappaport magazine, and was recently chosen by Luxury Daily as one of their luxury women to watch. And as you can probably see by the headshot, if you're looking at the blog post that we actually feature our podcast on, Jean is a fancy lady, and she's gorgeous and beautiful and knows a lot about jewelry as well. And she's just super smart. So I'm excited to have her for my first interview with her today, one of many that will be coming up. And let's dive in without further ado. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Thrive by Design. I am here with Jean Poe of Swoonery, and I'm so excited to have Jean here because we met recently at a little summit called the Jewelry Independent Summit, and I had the pleasure of being able to moderate Jean on a panel and sit in her lovely space for the entire day. So, Jean, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Tracy. I'm so excited.
It's so exciting to be here. Anyway, today, we were talking after the event, and, Jean is a total giver like I am. And she wanted to, we're just chit-chatting just about business and life and stuff and her history and all the things that she's gone through. I'm going to do a formal introduction in the intro when you listen to it, so you'll hear her background and everything. But the cool thing about Jean is that she has this amazing e-commerce business where she's selling other jewelry brands, but she also has a really diverse background in the industry. I'm going to let her share a little bit more about that in a moment. But one of the things that we noticed, and that the conversations that seem to be coming up in the Flourish and Thrive community and at that Jewelry Independent Summit, was like, how do you deal with problems at different stages of growth in business? Because the problems that you have when you're trying to launch a brand, the problems that you have when you're trying to kind of get past that first $100,000 maybe in revenue, and the problems that you have when you're actually trying to scale, to multiple six figures or even seven figures in a business are all so different at every single stage. So when Jean and I were chatting, we thought this would be an interesting conversation because we have such a diverse community over here. So Jean, thanks so much for being here. It's awesome to have you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Yeah. So as we dive in, what was your favorite thing first and foremost about the summit?
I loved seeing everyone in the industry come together, really like industry veterans, the best of the best, innovators and thought leaders come together to educate and support the next generation of brands.
Yeah.
I think it's really important that sort of the more mature professionals are supporting the newcomers because our industry is changing so much and it's really key.
It's changing so much. And I loved in the pre-interview, we were talking about something that I hope comes out later in this interview about like some myths and misconceptions about how you really actually grow a business. Yeah. So let's dive into a little bit of background about you so that our audience can kind of understand like what you've done. You've done so much in your life. So I just want to talk about that first.
Sure. So I guess I'll start in the context of jewelry. My family's been in the jewelry business I'm the fourth generation.
So great.
My great-grandfather acquired a British jewelry company. I'm from Shanghai, and he acquired a British jewelry company called Alexander Clark. And they had this massive store on the Bund, which is really like the Fifth Avenue of Shanghai. And he brought in all of the Western brands. So like Rolex, Lalique, Mikimoto, all of the brands were, basically he was the exclusive retailer in China.
Awesome.
Yeah. So, once we tie into what I do, it's sort of, you'll see the parallels. And then that was passed down to my grandfather, and my father wasn't able to sort of get his hands on the company because my family was persecuted during the Cultural Revolution.
Oh my gosh. I'm sorry about that. That's terrible.
Thank you. I mean, it happened. It's sort of like the cycle of the world, right? So they lost everything. And my parents came to the States in 1982 after I was born with $40, 2 suitcases. And my dad became a jeweler. So it was all, like really rags to riches story again. He started his manufacturing company. And so I grew up surrounded by manufacturing and product. And, my father manufactures for a lot of the larger brands. So that's where my love of jewelry came from. But of course, as typical for, immigrant parents, they're like, don't do what we do. Get an Ivy League education, become a banker, lawyer, a doctor. So I became a lawyer, and I was doing private equity, venture capital, mergers and acquisitions. And then about 5 years into my law career, I just happened to start working on startups. And so that's when I started investing in tech startups as well. And so that's sort of where the tech aspect of, my skill set comes in. And then after that, I decided to leave law. It wasn't for me. It wasn't creative enough. And I became a jewelry designer. I got my GIA. I went, did an apprenticeship with a master jeweler.
Awesome.
And then I ended up working with my father and, doing like cross-border deals and advising international jewelry companies, setting up here in the US, and then also, creating my own brand and my own label. So it really runs the whole gamut.
So tell us a little bit about Swoonrate, your current e-commerce company.
Sure. Swoonrate is a multi-brand retailer of designer fine jewelry. So we currently have over 80 brands. And really the genesis for Swoonrate came from my experience, the difficulties that I saw as a designer trying to make it in, this industry. And then also the problems that consumers were facing. It was just really hard for people to find jewelry that they liked. They weren't aware of brands. Mm-hmm. And, all this was happening about 3 years ago. And I saw that, with digital and e-commerce, or digital in general, I sort of got the idea, and I was like, people aren't going to be going to stores anymore. It's all going to be online. So when I launched Swoonrate, in like 2 years ago. It was February 2016. At that point, brands weren't even putting their designs on Instagram. Like designers,
because they're worried about like getting their products.
Yeah, like copying designs and everything. And so, to think that in 2.5 years, we've gone from I don't put photos of my jewelry on Instagram to everyone is going for e-commerce and everyone, is trying to sell jewelry online. I mean, like the world has come, 180.
Full circle, right?
Yeah.
I did an episode a while ago. Would people actually really buy luxury jewelry online? And I have always said yes, but I think that the way people buy online luxury jewelry in particular is very different than cheap fast fashion.
How do you think it's different?
I think it's different because it probably needs a higher touch. They need to be able to talk to someone or chat with someone. They need to see what it looks like on, because it is a bigger risk. Even if there is a solid return policy, someone's laying out sometimes thousands of dollars in cash.
Yeah.
And they want to know that they're not going to be scammed or something like that. So you have to build a lot of trust in order to get someone actually make that sale. I think people sometimes feel like, especially in our industry, that they can put up a website and not have to interact with their customers. But the more you interact with the customers, the more sales you're going to get. It's not just like this blank scenario where it's like a virtual store where people are just going to come in without interacting. It's just another way to be able to have a retail.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I really invested a lot in when I was building Swoonery was thinking about how we could replicate a personalized experience digitally.
Yep.
So, like jewelry, it's such a personal purchase. It's so much aesthetic based, right?
Yeah.
And so in a space where people aren't familiar with that many brands, what we decided to do is build a recommendation engine that actually understands your style. So, on the mobile, if you, going to swoonery.com on mobile, you'll see a little button that says take the style quiz. So you pick 3 pieces that you like. And once you do, your entire browsing experience is personalized to your taste. So you're only seeing jewelry that is like, if I like bold, niche, funky pieces, like that's what I'm seeing. So that's really where we're innovating in terms of like the luxury experience online.
That is so cool. And in so many ways, because like one thing I feel like I shop, let's say on Intermix a lot. And sometimes I'm just like, I don't have time to run to the store because I prefer to go to the store, quite frankly, because there's less in the store than online. It would be so useful for them to have tech like that, to understand like what I really wanted in not just like suggested for you, but to like edit the shopping experience. I would probably buy a lot more on their website.
I mean, if you think about it, that is one of the problems with digital, right? It's like you have so much choice that if I were to type in white V-neck or white button down, I mean, it tells me nothing about like what style it is, right? Mm-hmm. Like I want something a little bit funkier, a little bit more avant-garde, but that's not, I still have to spend hours and hours. So I really think that the future of luxury e-commerce is going to be that personalized experience. Where it's not just based on like tags and like, okay, color, material, but it actually understands who the customer is and what their style is.
I mean, forget shopping on Shopbop. You type in white t-shirt and like 1,000 things come up or something.
Yeah, totally.
It's so nuts. Cool. Okay. So let's talk about business. Now, one of the things that designers ask all the time, like, can I get a business partner and I want to get investors for my jewelry brand? And now I remember tackling the same question probably 15 years ago. And before that at different stages. And I would, I have an opinion about that. But I would love to more than anything, just like hear your opinion about that. Is it possible? Is it something that people do? Like, what's the deal with it?
Well, so when I started Swoonery, I did get investors. But Swoonery really is essentially a tech platform, right? It's a startup. And so I was innovating in technology. And so I went to the usual like angel investors, etc. The jewelry business, and especially for a brand, is very different than that. One of the biggest risks in jewelry is inventory cost. Mm-hmm. And so from an investor's point of view, they're not inclined to invest, so that you can buy diamonds and gold and like build out collections that then go and sit in retailers on consignment. It just doesn't make sense for them. So on top of that, before we used to have banks making loans. Do you remember the banks would make loans to like the diamond guys and everything?
Yeah.
And there was just so much scandal around it in recent years, like people getting ripped off or, cooking the books, that now banks aren't loaning to brands either. So in my opinion, as a brand, I think getting investors is really not a viable option unless you're like a David Yurman or something. And then in that case, it's really a private equity firm coming in and making that investment.
I think your best bet if you want investors is really like friends and family. And then you have to decide if you want that relationship or, I think like you started this tech company, basically. It's like the combination between jewelry and tech. Yeah. So you were able to position it like, look, this is like not just selling jewelry. This is about customizing experiences. And you probably have some sort of exit plan involved. We don't have to talk about that right now. But like to me, like that's what I see. Like they're investing in like a technology that can potentially be scalable across multiple types of businesses in the long run. So cool. Okay, so we got that out of the way. And that was something that I wanted to talk about because this is really about growing and scaling and solving problems. And so at the beginning, we kind of chit-chatted about the different kinds of problems you might have at different stages in business. And when we were talking the other day, let's say someone is starting up their business and they're struggling actually to get sales. That's a certain kind of problem. If they're trying to grow their business and kind of scale past that $100,000 in revenue mark, because I know that's like, I feel like one of the first benchmarks, especially for smaller independent brands, especially those not selling luxury jewelry, because it takes a lot more jewelry to sell in order to get there.
Yeah.
There's like another benchmark because you start getting busier, and there's more volume, and you might need to have support in that. And then the next phase of scale is so different because it's actually like hiring a team or manufacturers and dealing with bigger production orders. Yeah. So let's kind of dial it back in the beginning. Let's dial it back like to the general broader question, like to be like a strategic problem solver. Like what are some of the skills that you've seen? Because you've worked in all sorts of kind of industry and types of business. Your dad's a manufacturer. You probably experienced a lot of brands coming to him that maybe had some of the issues that people who are trying to scale their business have had over the years. How would you what would be your approach to like problem solving and trying to like anticipate some of the things that might go wrong?
I think the most important thing in terms of anticipating problems is to know your industry, is to know the process, research every single aspect of it. There are things that it's great to have the dream of being a jewelry designer, but you have to know what that entails. It's not just, okay, let me assemble a couple, lay out a few stones and then boom, I'm suddenly a jewelry designer. Like, okay, you're going to be thinking about, is your pricing right? Where are you sourcing your stones from? Are you sourcing them from manufacturers? How does that impact your bottom line? Who's going to be looking after your quality control if you don't come from a jewelry background, right? So I think that step one is really just educating yourself about not just the art of jewelry and like jewelry history in terms of design, but also the process, the production process, manufacturing process, even wearability. So many people don't think about, okay, like something looks cute, but is it wearable? Is it going to be too heavy? Is it going to fall forward? All of those things matter. And then thinking about, okay, so how am I going to go to market, right? It's very different to have private clients at first versus then starting to work with retailers. So every step along the way, it takes intensive research and, just educating yourself about, what the issues are, what to look out for.
Okay, so that was great. So basically, like when you're just starting out, you really need to educate yourself on all parts of the business and understand not only what it takes to build a brand, but like the back end business stuff. You talked about pricing. And I'm sure, you would also agree with me, like they need to understand like how numbers work, how inventory works, how a break even, point works and what that even is. Because those are all the things that help you make educated decisions so that you're, not overbuying inventory and stuck with a bunch of stuff. You mentioned inventory earlier. And, you're really able to build this solid platform that can grow on and continue to rise. Now, as the business starts growing, you start having a different set of problems because once you're kind of like at the 100, 200, 300 mark range, also I think depends on your type of business model. Because if you're selling fine jewelry, you could certainly be a solo business owner and just have a few contractors helping you and still probably do like 300 grand or something like that in sales because the price point's higher. But if you're selling lower price point jewelry and you're, selling $300,000 in volume, that requires a lot more pieces of jewelry to actually do that, and requires like a little bit more work. So you're probably at that point going to need to think about hiring a team or a manufacturer or some sort of partner to help you not only manage and run your production, but to deal with the receivables and the financials of the company. You might even have salespeople that you're working with. So you kind of come into different sort of issues as you're running that. Do you have any advice for people who are kind of in that stage, kind of getting past that $100,000 mark, where they're starting to have to think about getting people to help them with the next?
Yeah, I think for me, given how e-commerce has changed businesses, right? I would say start with a direct-to-consumer business first. That really wasn't as available when we were, sort of starting out because no one bought jewelry online back then, right? But having an e-commerce website, it allows you to do a few things. It allows you to build up your client base, start making some revenue, and it allows you to test and really see what customer response is to your jewelry. So you're not, making like a 50-piece collection and then, only selling 2 or 3 pieces, right? So it gives you a lot more data to work with. I can't emphasize enough how important data is, no matter what, stage of your company. Like you should just know, how are people reacting? What are you doing about it?
I love that you say that, because no one likes it. They're like, no one's buying, but like you just use it. Like if someone is stuck, like all like 3 pieces are buying or selling, but the rest isn't. It's just information. Like people take it so personally. It's like, this is information that you can use to become better.
Yeah, completely. I mean, it's like, the same thing. It's like, okay, if even like in a dating scenario, right? Like I don't do well. I don't bat well with this type of guys. I do really well with this type of guy, right? Exactly. It's sort of like, okay, adjust. It's common sense, really. I like to make analogies about dating all the time. I think
me too. We're going to get along great. Because that's what sales is, right? Like dating.
It really is. It really is. But I think your question was probably really more geared around like how to hire a team and at what point do you know that you need a team, right? Yeah. I think you start realizing that you need a team when you're not able to fulfill orders, where like it's actually slowing the growth of your business. At that point, I would suggest taking a look at, okay, what's the stopgap? Is it production? Is it sales? Is it fulfillment? Or is it, like management of some sort? And then once you figure out where to target, then that's, the person that you hire. I don't think that there's a general rule, like this is the first person you should hire. However, always bring in the sales first, right? So
there's sales over like low level admin work?
100%.
Okay.
100%. Cool. And I say that because I made that mistake at Swoonery. I invested first in, tech and then in marketing, right? And there's 2 trains of thought there. One is like sort of where the tech world comes, and it's like, okay, like just build it. And then if you build it, they will come, right? And it's like companies like Uber, where it's like, who's gonna use like driving services? And then you build it and then they come, which is great. But the investing environment at that point and still doesn't really get jewelry. It doesn't really understand this problem that we're solving for jewelry, right? So then I have to prove my value in sales. And so once I started seeing like, okay, this is how much we're spending to build the tech versus this is how much we're spending on marketing and sales, one delivers like returns, whereas the other one doesn't. And so when you have limited cash flow or budget, always look at growing your budget and your cash flow first.
Yeah. So investing in the growth and then hiring the support behind the growth.
Exactly.
And there's different ways to do that. So thanks for clarifying that, because that makes a lot of sense. So that might look to some of you like running Facebook ads or strategic Instagram ads or something like that, or even focusing on investing in someone who's going to help build the right kind of SEO for your company, because there's all different ways to get traffic to your site. So thank you for clarifying. And or hiring like a technical salesperson, depending on the business model. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so the flip side of that, right, is that you have so many sales coming in and everyone wants this problem. You have so many sales coming in that what's slowing your growth is your inability to fulfill it.
Yep.
Right. At that point, then your hire would be different. It would be, okay, let me look at either, is it a production issue? And so I need to find an offshore manufacturer, or is it, I just don't have the bandwidth to process all these orders myself and I need an admin to help me.
Or even like a couple of production workers. Yeah. I mean, there's so many ways to approach production because if you're getting super mass orders overseas might be good, but there's also, opportunity for local manufacturers or piecework type of work, or even setting up a studio where people can come and you hire them and train them to work for you. So multiple scenarios there on scaling. And this brings us to another thing that we talked about the other day too, which was about, how do you plan to scale up and problem solve there? And how do you plan when you have to scale down? Because this is something, especially if you want to sell to retailers, that can happen. Like if a retailer drops your line or they're only buying for one season, because places like Anthropologie and Sundance, sometimes, it's seasonal buys that they're doing. I'm not sure how Swoonery works. If you're doing seasonal buys or if you are investing in or partnering with designers for a long time, but every retailer is different. And so you have to be prepared and think that through. So what's your advice on scaling up and scaling down?
Well, I think first, having a strategy with respect to your retailers really makes a difference. The way that Swoonery operates is that we don't do consignment and we don't purchase. Everything is dropship.
Okay.
So we'll get an idea of how much inventory per piece the brand has of our selections. And then once an order is placed, then we put it through to the brand and, they ship out of their inventory or they'll make a piece if it's not in stock. It makes my job a little bit harder because now we're also managing the client side and their expectations. But I really believe that inventory is a huge, huge, risk for brands and it's really harmful to our industry. Now, having said that, if you do have a strategy of working with particular retailers and you end up, sort of producing a line for them and putting it on consignment, one of the things that I would advise thinking about is what are you going to do when the pieces come back? I mean, when you were selling to retailers, what percentage of, product do you think would come back every year?
Well, we didn't have consignment back then. It was all wholesale.
It was all wholesale. Wow.
Yeah. So I worked with consignment boutiques like in the very beginning, like back in 98, 97, maybe a little bit. But like I built my business when wholesale was strong and closed my business when wholesale was not so strong anymore. So even like the big stores like ABC Home, Sundance Catalog, Anthropologie, they all paid for product. There was and then the small boutiques did too. That was just, there were times when I didn't get paid, obviously. Yeah. And in 2008, a lot of stores filed for bankruptcy and I didn't get the product back or get paid. So that caused another type of problem, which I hope no one has to deal with because it was terrible. So almost like dropship is almost even safer as long as you're partnering with the best brands. But for stores that actually or people who actually do that and sell on consignment, what I would tell them is to start slow and to make sure that they're partnering with people who are actually going to sell their product. Because my feeling is that a lot of times stores just want inventory to fill up their shelves and they're not as committed to selling the work because they don't own it when it's on consignment. So
I agree.
Just to be careful. And if a store is not selling your product, you have to, within reason, if you're selling very expensive jewelry, it might take longer to make sales. If you're selling things that aren't very expensive and they aren't selling, maybe it's just not a good fit or the store is just not really committed to their brands. Like you really want to be partnering with people who are committed to selling your work.
Yeah. And, just because a retailer sounds cool or has like a really great, brand image, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be, the best thing for you as a brand, right? Because most of the retailers, if we're talking about, clothing retailers, they're selling clothing, their brand comes from like their clothing sales and their approach is going to be very different towards jewelry. So even though they may sound like, oh my God, I want to work with them, they're really not that in tune with the needs of designers or how much risk, the designers are really taking. Yeah, exactly. So it really, the responsibility falls on you to understand like what's the impact of working with, how many stores and like what's your reach and all that stuff. The worst situation to be in is to have agreed to work with all these retailers, produce product on consignment, and then realize that it doesn't sell and then it's returned to you. And then, most brands that I've seen, the hugest mistake that they made is then they go and they work with discounters. So they'll send it to I don't want to mention any names.
Yeah.
But, to discount sites, and then you've ruined your brand equity. And then it lives on a digital platform as a discount product, and, game over, really.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that, because discounting is the worst.
The
worst sales strategy in the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's funny. We had this designer. She was really struggling to sell this piece of jewelry. She kept lowering the price. And then she's like, I'm just going to raise the price and see what happens. Yeah. She raised it and it sold within 15 minutes.
Yeah. It really, especially now when there's so many jewelry brands sort of entering the market at a lower price point.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
It all starts looking the same.
And you have to have, one of the things I interviewed Delia Falk, and she's on episode 168 if you guys want to listen to it, but last week. And we talked about the things that she looks for as a luxury buyer, and how innovation is one of the most important things. So the more that you can stand out and look different. And one thing that I noticed about you that I commented on right away was the jewelry that you were wearing and the jewelry that's hanging on your walls, because you have a ton of statement jewelry that's in your own personal collection. And you're like, mm-hmm. Oh, this is so-and-so. And all the pieces that you were wearing and that I saw around your studio really stood out. And even the jewelry that you are curating on Swoonery to sell to your customers really stands out. I was stalking your website last night. So, but, I noticed that it's very different. The point of view is different, that it's not stuff that everyone else is doing. And so you want to make sure that you're finding that edge of the right price point for your brand and the right innovative look, that, you always are going to need some of the basic core pieces to your collection, but to make sure that you are positioning yourself as a brand in a way that shows who you are, and creates that signature style. So I think that's the most important thing.
Totally.
Okay, awesome. This was great. Thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. I'm having so much fun. I could talk about the jewelry industry for years.
I'm gonna have you back on. Let's just have you back on.
Okay.
For another show. We'll keep just finding different topics and I'll have you on. So tell us a little bit about Swoonery. And you also have this amazing space. You can kind of see it in the background, beautifully decorated, as the sun is coming into the window across.
I know. How perfect, right? I should just it's magic hour, and I'm just going to lean here.
It's magic hour over here too. You couldn't see my face.
So Swoonery really, I think I touched upon it, as we were chatting, but really it's a luxury online retailer for designer fine jewelry that is, on the one hand, solving the problem for the consumer of how do I find jewelry that really reflects who I am? Mm-hmm. So things that are unique, that are well made, but also identifiable and speak to me as an individual. And we do that through tech. And then it also, I'm really committed to supporting the industry and creating a more collaborative ecosystem for, to continue to grow brands, because I'm very clear that the future of the jewelry industry is going to be brands, and because our industry has all these weird, eccentricities, being able to guide the brands and, to be successful big brands is, I think, really important. So having said that, what differentiates us as a retailer is, this dropship model. And then as the brands grow and as the brands scale, we really support them in terms of, okay, well now, now let's think about how we would position you vis-a-vis the other brands now. And so I'm really hands-on from the beginning, thinking about their strategy, looking at their product, giving them feedback. And we work with huge brands too, but I do that, sort of across the board. And then once the brands are able to, then we may take consignment depending on, how to fulfill, how much volume we have for the orders, etc. And then the Swoonery, jewelry salon is a space that where I'm sitting right now. It's really a space that speaks to creating that personal engagement with your customer.
Yeah.
So, this is a new program that we're launching for the Swoonery Collective, and I'm now inviting brands to come and rent the space for trunk shows, for press previews, and even for private clients. I've seen a lot of, so many well-known, even jewelry masters, right?
Yeah.
They'll fly to New York, they rent out a suite, they don't have security, cameras, safes, displays, any of that. And it just doesn't make sense. So the Swoonery Collective now is available for rent by hour, by day for press, trunk shows, pop-ups, whatever. And it's really meant to, support brands as they grow and international brands as they're coming here. And then just be surrounded by jewelry and a beautiful space and be able to work together.
Awesome. Jean, thank you for sharing that. If someone wanted to rent your space, where would they go to find that?
Yeah, you can either Google the swoonrate Collective or you can email brands@swoonrate.com.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much, Jean, for being here today. You're amazing.
Thank you, Tracy. You are too. We should do this regularly.
Let's do it.
Regular.
I'll interview you every month. Let's do it.
All right, cool. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. It was thrilling to have Jean on the show, and it was just so fun to be able to meet her at the Jewelry Independent Summit several months ago. Actually, in the summer is where we met. We recorded this interview back in August, but I'm excited to have her here. And if you want to check out more details about the Swoonery brand showroom, I'll have all the information over on the show notes. Definitely check it out because it is a great place to do press previews, to host trunk shows, and to gather your friends or your buyers or whatever to feature your collection. So just a great resource if you don't have a home base here in New York and you're traveling to New York and you want to get in front of all the important people. Awesome sauce. Alrighty. So if you haven't yet, make sure you check out our sponsor. They're amazing. We're going to have all the details on the show notes as well. So you can check those out over at flourishthriveacademy.com/episode 173. Thank you so much for listening today. This is Tracy Matthews signing off. Until next time.